think in many places you have had ideological monocultures form on university campuses. Some questions are sort of off the table. The approach in many ways to studying history or the history of U.S. institutions is pre-programmed.
Welcome to the New Enlightenment podcast from Adam Smith's Panmure House. I'm Adam Dixon. Today I'm joined by Ryan Streeter. Ryan is Executive Director of the Civitas Institute at the University of Texas at Austin. Most recently, before returning to academia, Ryan was the State Farm James Q. Wilson Scholar and Director of Domestic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Ryan, welcome to the New Enlightenment podcast.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. It's a pleasure to be here.
So tell us a bit about the Civitas Institute. What is it? Why does it exist? And what are you doing there?
Yeah, so the Institute is probably best thought of as a university-based think tank that is committed to translating research into ideas that policymakers can use that can inform the media debate about important economic and political issues in America and even around the world. So we're really committed to inquiry into kind of the underpinnings of a free and prosperous society. One way to think of it might be that we produce work in kind of just an ongoing way on the basic unalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Like how do those look today? How are we doing with them? Where can we improve? And that's probably the easiest way to understand what our scholars are involved in. We have fellows of the Institute who are UT faculty members at several different colleges and departments around campus. And then we also have fellows that are at other universities. So our job is not to produce academic research that competes with what they're already doing elsewhere. We really are translationals. We're a new institute, so we don't have everything up and running that we will soon. But by the beginning of 2025, the end of this autumn semester, be starting to publish papers. We've already been convening and hosting a lot of events and bringing people to campus to debate and discuss these sorts of issues. But we'll be focused a lot on economic dynamism in terms of what do we need to do to get more people in more places, building, making, creating more good things. So that has everything to do with housing policy, migration, entrepreneurial economics, those sorts of things. And then we're also going to support a lot of work on just upward mobility, pursuing the American dream. The pursuit of happiness. I mentioned the Declaration. That one's an important one. So prospects for upward mobility for people that grow up in disadvantaged places, lower income places. We have a number of scholars that work on those issues. And then, we'll have quite a bit of work as well, just on comparative constitutionalism, the status of our legal system and our courts, and just our political institutions. Where is reform possible to preserve and expand liberty in more places? Those are kind of the core broad issues. And then, where the Institute's publications go is very much a function of our scholars themselves. I mean, we don't tell our fellows at the Institute what to do. They have their own work, and they'll be writing, and they already are, on a number of different issues that are important to them and their work. And we exist to support that work, to make sure it gets in the right hands, to make sure that policymakers and the media have access to it and know about it. So that's probably the best way to describe what the Institute does. And I really do look forward to having some of the stuff coming out the doors starting at the end of this year. And so listeners, if they come to our website, which will be new and it's being overhauled right now to be completely new in about a month and a half, you'll start to see a number of things that hopefully will be of interest to you.
Yes, and we hosted a co-organized roundtable here at Panmure House in June, looking at the Scottish Enlightenment. We didn't produce any papers out of it, but we'll see if hopefully we'll do so.
It was a great gathering, and an A-list of scholars. And I think that we do plan, as one of our paper series, to focus on this paper series will be called Commerce and Civilization, and it really will focus on this interplay between the way our economy works and the way our kind of habit-shaping institutions work. So what is the relationship between civil society and growing economy? Where are the tensions? Where are reforms possible? And so a big track of that will be looking even historically at places that have thrived before. And, obviously the 18th century Edinburgh is like one of the first places you want to go. So I think we'll be focusing on, we'll be publishing economic historians and political philosophers, as well as present day economists and political scientists doing more empirical work on those questions.
And Civitas Institute, you're part of a new school of civic leadership, right? So that's kind of started in parallel with the civic, with Civitas Institute. And this school of civic leadership is part of a broader trend that we're seeing across many, mostly I would say public universities in America. North Carolina, Florida are establishing these kinds of schools. Can you say a bit more about this trend or these new schools of civic leadership, which when you look under the hood, at least when I look up under the hood, I just see, well, isn't this what a liberal arts education is all about or should be about? I mean, can you say a bit more about this trend and what it says about higher education in America today?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because it is a new thing and it's not something that a lot of people are aware of, but people are starting to become aware of it. It's catching the attention, especially if you're in the academy. So yeah, there is something of a trend right now on large flagship public university campuses mostly to create new colleges or new degree granting schools in those universities that they're all a little bit different from each other, but have in common this mission to sort of recreate a liberal arts education with a focus on American institutions, Western civilization, economics, and they all do them a little bit differently. There's an existing school that was kind of a test case at Arizona State University. It's been around for a few years. There's what we're doing at the University of Texas at Austin. The University of Florida has the same effort in the Hamilton Center, and there's a similar effort at the University of North Carolina, Ohio State University, Tennessee, a few other universities. Where we're unique at the University of Texas is that we have these two things. We have the new School of Civic Leadership, and then we have the Civitas Institute. And we're kind of best thought of as sort of joined at the hip on these issues. The school is a little over a year old, and so it's developing its curriculum and hiring faculty, and we'll be welcoming its first cohort of students in a year. It's offering a minor this academic year, and we'll be offering the first cohort of incoming freshmen, as we say here in the United States, in a year's time. It's a degree that is called a civics honors degree. If you look at the structure of it, like you mentioned, and when you look under the hood, these look really kind of like classical liberal arts degrees. And for British listeners, everyone's probably familiar with the PPE model degree. And I would say, even though this degree is not called that, if you kind of look at the course offerings and the curriculum that's being developed, it resembles that. There's a strong focus on the history of our political and economic institutions. There's a strong strain of constitutionalism here in the American version, and then an economics track as well. We are the School of Civic Leadership, and then we also have the Institute, which I direct, which I described in the opening as kind of a university-based think tank. And both of them, are committed to the inquiry and study of the underpinnings, of a free society. And I think that the efforts at the other universities would be characterized similarly. Of them have the word civic in their names, kind of with an attempt to recreate a civic education, which has actually a long history in the United States. When you just use that term civics or civic education, people immediately think of kind of just the boring basics that they get in primary school, learning about bicameral legislatures and all that. But here in the United States, that the civics movement actually started as a movement in higher education in the late 19th century to actually make a part of our university education focused on training and raising up civic leaders. So whether people are in business, whether people go into government, whether people go into the media, that they have an understanding of how American institutions work. They understand the political economy that we live and work in every day and are capable of providing leadership in that setting, regardless of which sector of the society that they're in. So that's a kind of a noble cause. And I think the school sees itself that way. The people that are signing up as faculty and the people that and I think the students that will come there, they want to be a part of a kind of a noble project like that. And I think that's kind of a common strain through these various efforts that you see on university campuses. All of them are a little different from each other in terms of the curriculum, in terms of the degree, but they have some of those common features.
But I guess the question is, where is it coming from, right? Are these schools, some would probably assume it's a backlash to, I mean, if we look at campus life in the last, say, 5-10 years, it seems to be driven more by activist, let's say, propensities. And that's not to say that universities haven't had activism. I mean, if you look at it in the 70s or during the Vietnam War, I mean, these were hotbeds of activism. So universities have always been lively places of protest and dispute. But what is it in the current context, right? So, I mean, last year, in the United States, we've seen multiple university presidents resign over the conflict in Israel-Palestine and the encampments. Before that, there's, removal of statues and the like, and decolonization of curricula. Are these schools not just simply a backlash against, I'll just say it, the wokeness, if you like, that we see?
Yeah, I mean that's a fair characterization in broad terms. I mean, I think that let me start with the word woke, because I think that that is sort of overused in our politics, and it provokes a reaction in people's minds.
That's why I said it. I wanted to provoke.
Yeah. No, I get it. And it's would these new schools that I was describing in answering your previous question be happening if those things hadn't happened, if those perceptions of how university campuses have changed hadn't become sort of widespread? And the answer is probably no. I mean, I think these are a response to what is a real or perceived problem on university campuses. I think it's a real problem. I care about this effort because I think that in many places, and it's not universally the same everywhere, I think in many places you have had ideological monocultures form on university campuses. Some questions are sort of off the table. The approach in many ways to studying history or the history of U.S. institutions is pre-programmed. There are certain questions about the legitimacy of American institutions, structural inequalities, these sorts of things. You kind of have to, if you're going to teach in a lot of departments around the country, you just kind of have to sign up to a kind of almost a doctrine. And I have colleagues here at the university who would say that I've characterized that unfairly, but I really do think that the response we're seeing around the country from faculty to what's being stood up, I think it just kind of proves the point. We don't screen for people's politics when we're hiring faculty or appointing fellows at the institute. It's almost more of a self-selection kind of a thing. There are people who really want to be a part of an effort where they can pursue research into these core questions of U.S. civil society, of economics, of constitutional studies, without feeling like they have to look over their shoulder or that someone's going to be, canceling them or shouting them down, that they want to be able to pursue this stuff in the true spirit of free inquiry. So I think that there's something about a self-selection, the kind of people that are signing up for this, the kind of faculty that want to teach there. And I expect even, among students, you'll see those people who might describe themselves as right of center in their politics, or they are classical liberals. They're like, well, this is the kind of place where that I can do the stuff I like without recrimination. So there probably is some self-selection aspects to this, which are very real. But I can tell you I've been at the University of Texas now for a year. I was at a large think tank in Washington, D.C. for 7 years before that. Had been at UT Austin once before that. Had been in and around universities. As someone who's worked in the world of public policy with academically trained people, and I'm academically trained myself, I've spent a lot of time at universities, and this has been a constant sort of topic of conversation for the last 5, 6, 7 years, that universities are in some places becoming sort of monocultures, where free inquiry just really isn't kind of the spirit of the day. And the kinds of people that have reached out to us, we've been doing a lot of recruiting, but we've had a lot of unsolicited outreach from across the country, from people in the Ivies, elite, institutions, people whose politics I would characterize as center left or even progressive, who say, I'm kind of tired of this culture that we're in. I want to be a part of something that's more like what I think of as an ideal university experience. And so given the outpouring of interest that we have, I just am convinced that the problems that you hear talked about in the press in very politically charged ways, which is unfortunate, are getting at something very real and fundamental, something that's kind of gone astray on our campuses. And I don't think we'd be getting the response that we've been getting from people if that weren't the case.
No, I think just as a personal anecdote, I mean, I noticed so I started teaching in 2009 and noticed a progressively more difficult classroom where when I first started teaching, you would assign a reading and the students would approach it as, I need to understand what this text means, what the person says, and what the idea is, and then we talk about it, and you might compare it to another text. Then at some point it became, but I have a problem with the identity of this person. And then it became, you're assigning this because you think you want me to believe this. And you'd have to have these arguments with students saying, I'm sorry, just because I assign a particular author or this particular text has nothing to do with me trying to indoctrinate you. And it's more of, I've assigned this to you because it's, part of the canon, or I've assigned it to you because it's relevant to policy or history. It was just a shock to me to think that students had already been kind of closed off to that sense of, well, shouldn't you just be open to reading and understanding ideas, even if you don't like them? But that assumption that I was trying to then indoctrinate them, and that made me think. And these were older students, postgraduate or graduate students, and I thought, had they been indoctrinated at some point where someone was teaching them how to think or what to think? Whereas I always thought, no, we're having a debate here, and it's a kind of a difficult thing, and it's made conversation in courses difficult and unappealing. And you think, well, this is not what I signed up to as an academic.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason you become an academic is because you're interested in ideas and debating ideas, and have that open inquiry. And for some reason, it's kind of closed off. And I know lots of academics that have said, oh yeah, I'm self-censoring. I'm keeping quiet. Don't rock the boat because they're afraid of students and they're afraid of administrators.
Yeah, no, that's something that I've experienced. Other of my colleagues have as well, and I think that's a good description of where things have kind of gone wrong. There's lots of different theories out there about the origins of this and why this has happened, and there's probably several different explanations. And also, I want to just reiterate. I know I've mentioned this before, but I think it's important. It's not the same everywhere. I think in some universities are just really struggling with this in ways that are less of a problem somewhere else. But in general, as a trend, I get the feeling, and this has been confirmed by others, or I'd say others in my professional circles kind of agree with this. It seems that we've peaked it. So I think the most kind of feverish aspect of this trend has maybe crested a year or two ago. I think, and the events of the last year on university campuses, just because of the conflict in Israel and Palestine, has also just created a new sense of urgency among some people that are worried about what university campuses have become. And some of the outreach we've gotten over the last year is directly related to that. I mean, people on university campuses elsewhere in the country are like, I see what you're building at UT. I want to be a part of that. I can't put up with what I'm experiencing now anymore. It's begotten just almost intellectually and ideologically compromised here at my home institution. So I think we've seen a trend. In some places this is still probably as big a problem as it was 5 years ago. I think in a lot of places it's crested, but your characterization, I think, is accurate. And a lot of students are aware of this as well. We have an undergraduate program at the Civitas Institute. Well, it's open to students from across UT's campus. It's about 20 students. It's competitive to get into. It goes through the whole academic year where they get to come to lectures, visit with speakers. They have a retreat where they go away and hear from really interesting presenters. And I'm so impressed with these students. They're sophomores, juniors, seniors here for second, third, fourth years at the university, and they are hungry for very rich kind of deep dive into the history of the institutions that they're going to be expected to be leaders in one day. They don't want to come into a forum where the certain questions are off limits or where they have to, just are expected to recite back some ideologically kind of airtight doctrinal view on inequality or structural racism or the immorality of capitalism or all these things. They want to really understand the institutions that we all kind of have to live and work in if you're going to be a civic leader. And it gives me really a lot of hope for the future when I see how these students engage, the questions they ask, what they are curious about, and just the dedication and the hard work that they're willing to put into being a part of the program. I once won a teaching award, and I won't say where this was, but it was one of these things where the student association would give awards to like 4 professors every year, and I got one of them. And during the award ceremony, they would read testimonials from the students as to why they voted for this particular candidate. I don't even remember what the name of the award was, but the testimonials were things like, Dr. Streeter treats us all as a society of peers. All questions are allowed on the table. And, afterwards, I talked to some of my students in office hours. I was like, I seem to have just won an award for being a professor. What is your experience elsewhere here?
Yeah.
This department. And, and they, to your point, they said things like, well, I mean, there are certain papers that I just can't write in, Professor so-and-so's class because it departs from his or her kind of view of the world on this. And it's clear that we have to stay within a certain ideological lane. And in your class, we're able to write on the things that we want to write about in the way that you've helped, understand. And I was stunned by that, because I just kind of thought I was teaching like everybody was teaching. And I've learned that's not the case. And students are aware of that. So I think, when you've probably read some articles and stories about declining applications to some of the elite universities here in the United States, and some of the Ivies have seen declines. Well, those students are applying somewhere. And I can tell you one thing, they're applying to the University of Texas.
Yeah.
or they're applying to the University of Florida. I've talked with former colleagues in Washington, D.C., whose kids are at, some of the elite private schools in the D.C. area where they're applying for university, and a number of them are applying to large public universities. They've seen what's been going on some of these private university, elite university campuses, and they really just want to have more of a well-rounded university experience. So that's probably creating some kind of course correction for some of the more elite universities that have kind of gotten out over their skis over the last few years. But it's hard to right that ship, and I think some of them are struggling with that. So we'll see how it goes. But this whole environment has actually just kind of helped us in the sense that we're getting students applying, we're getting faculty reaching out wanting to teach here, and I think that actually says something about the environment of higher education in America, right?
I think a question, though, and I imagine some would say, well, are you not allowing for criticism or critical inquiry of our existing institutions in the Western world? I mean, because again, I think my view is we should, it's one thing, we should be looking at theories that critique structural inequalities, right? We should be able to kind of question the institutions of American democracy and say, do they work? Are they fair? I mean, so I guess the question then is how, maybe I'm trying to kind of like have a leading question there, but I'm assuming someone will say, well, no, I'm thinking of the activists that think, we need to destroy the whole entire system and bring it up again. To what degree is there, does the curriculum and does the Institute allow for such in-depth criticism that is perhaps radical, right?
Sure. Yeah, no, absolutely. The curriculum will. It's founded, on this basic idea that we need, in order to develop the critical thinking and analytical skills that we hope our students will, they need to be exposed to a variety of interpretations of events historically. They need to be exposed to some of the dominant writers and thinkers that have shaped the way subsequent generations have thought about these issues. Yes, they will be reading Marx and Hayek, if you will.
Right.
They will. If you think about what something like the great books encompasses, or the Harvard classics, kind of runs across the gamut of literature, of philosophy, of economics, of social science, for a reason. That these are outsized influence on institutions and on public life in the United States and around the world. And we want our students to understand that and to be exposed to that. And again, I think that the kind of students that will apply to be a part of this, the students that are already signing up for some of our undergraduate programs, and the kind of faculty that are coming to the school, they like that environment. That's what they want. That's what they're not experiencing in some of the other places, on the faculty side, where they're not experiencing in the places that they're coming from, where it's not a well-rounded environment of free inquiry. And that's what we're trying to recreate. I think the kinds of people that teach in this new school, the kinds of people that are fellows at the Institute that I oversee, the kinds of students that will sign up, they're going to share some core values and principles, right? I think they're going to be predisposed to think that human agency matters in prosperity, for instance, that there's a role for individuals to improve their lives, that they're not just purely in a situation that they have no control over. I think if you're going to prepare people for civic leadership, you have to actually understand what that actually means and where the inhibitions are, where the barriers are from being able to improve your lot and your well-being, and what we can do about that, why those barriers are there. And so I think there are going to be people that share these core values. They're going to believe that, basically the fundamental rights articulated in the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution, the first 10 amendments, get us something that's very important, and we need to understand those things rather than just be critical of them. And so you're going to, I think sympathetic inquiry to the tradition of sort of natural rights and the core kind of foundational pillars of American democratic and political life are going to be something that, people are in this effort approaching with kind of an open mind, and even with a sympathy that you find lacking in other places. So people are going to share some of these core commitments, but we're going to have professors teaching in this school that have, sharp disagreements about some of these things, and the students will be exposed to that. It wouldn't be a university if we didn't allow for that. So I think it's always a balancing act, and it really depends, I think, on the quality of the faculty that we bring on board and the kinds of students that are admitted into the program. And I'm pretty hopeful about how it's going to work out.
So, I think for one, though, it would help if high schools in America taught civics again. It was taught when I was a student in the late 90s in high school. I'm not sure if it's taught anymore. I mean, I haven't looked at it, but I kind of feel when you talk to people and you at least, I mean, I talk to a lot of Europeans where I have to say, no, the United States president does not have complete authority to do whatever he or she wants to do. You have to explain that, no, there's this thing called Congress and there's a thing called, the judiciary, and you've got the states and all these things. And, there's a lot of power is fairly distributed across.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't even know if Americans understand some of these basics of how institutions work, right? So it's I think we had Manu Shafiq here at Panmure House a year and a half ago, and she was talking about civic education as being an important thing, and it's like, well, are we doing that? And now she's not at Columbia University anymore, but it's but a question without going too much into the state of high schools in America. How, though, these new institutes like Civitas or these new schools of civic leadership, how would you respond to someone saying, well, isn't this driven by partisan politics? It's not surprising that they are popping up in places like Texas or Florida or North Carolina, places that lean right, Ohio lean right in their politics. How would you respond to this? Why aren't we seeing this in California or New York or are we? I mean, how would you respond to that? Is it as partisan as some would presume it would be?
Yeah, certainly when you look at the states where it's popping up, that interpretation of events, I can see why people would say that. And you have had members of the legislatures in these places speak positively about these efforts. And again, I think it's because of an underrepresentation of conservatives in higher education in general. I'm making that declaration as an empirical claim. I mean, I think there have been enough surveys and a couple books written about this in terms of people. There's just been a trend over the last 50 years where you used to have more kind of political diversity of just opinion in politics in a lot of places. And that's just changed, especially in the humanities and the social sciences. And so it just kind of stands to reason that people are more center-right in their politics are going to see these efforts as a good thing or necessary. And in the public university context, you have trustees appointed by governors, you have state legislatures providing appropriations. There's certain levers that you have in a public university context that you don't really have in a private university context to actually make some changes like this. So I think when you combine all those things together, it makes sense that some of these new efforts are popping up in red or purple states. I kind of, just given how things have been going since this got underway over the last couple of years, I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see the same thing happening in public universities in blue states. I think in some ways, kind of like the charter school movement of the 1990s in the United States. I think Minnesota was the first state, I think a purple-blue legislature, and the first charter school was in a very blue place. Same thing with the voucher movement was in Wisconsin. Milwaukee's where that started. And then you started to see states copying each other as this movement kind of took off. There was no federal policy that led to the adoption of charter schools around the country. It was kind of state by state by state. I sort of suspect something similar is going to happen here as these schools stand up and they'll show that there's a demand for the kind of liberal arts education that they're offering. And I wouldn't be surprised if you start to see a more politically diverse set of states kind of doing that. I've also just heard through the grapevine that, just through my own professional networks, that in a couple of elite private universities, there's been some discussion about doing something similar to this, or taking existing centers and trying to create something that approximates this. Because I think they see that even within their own student bodies, there's a demand for it. So it's early. And as these different schools and colleges grow in the public universities where they are and as new ones start, some will be bigger than others, some will be more successful than others, some, we'll see how it goes. There's definitely momentum behind it. There's a lot of interest in it. And I think, I've just kind of kept a growing list of trustees and donors that are very publicly broken with their alma maters. There are places, mostly with elites and a lot of Ivies where they've just said, I'm not doing this anymore. I want to direct my resources elsewhere. Of course, we are very interested in
yes,
being an object of that interest. But I think
same here.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're looking for a place to write your checks, you should look at the University of Texas at Austin, because we'll take it and put it to good use. But I think that is going to, that's not just happening in a vacuum. That's going to result in certain things. I think you have university leadership in these places that realize, we probably have to just admit to ourselves we've been a little too ideologically monochrome. It's time to actually open up on our own campus something that approximates a kind of a more robust and well-rounded approach to a liberal arts education. And so I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years you see something like this happening on private university campuses as well as publics. But your characterization of how and where it started is certainly not something that I'll dispute.
But to be fair to Texas, it's not completely red state. I mean, people assume that it's very Republican, but there's, the Democratic Party in Texas is still very strong, very big. Austin as a city has always had that more liberal in America sense kind of vibe to it. Mm-hmm. So it's not completely, and this is what people always assume that America is kind of super divided, and actually, no, there's a lot of variation within states that on an aggregate might lean right or lean left.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good point. And it's Texas is, as observers have been writing about for a while, has been, one of the fastest growing places in America. And but when you look under the hood there, the growth is driven almost entirely by its four major metro areas: Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin. And there, obviously the politics of those places is very different than the state as a whole. But you see a lot of people moving from California and New York. And this is the second time I've lived in Austin. I love Austin. I think it's a dynamic place. There's a certain type of person that packs up and leaves California to come here. They're this interesting blend of people that are both sort of Silicon Valley and Texan. Like they love the big sky approach that this state offers. You can build and make things here a lot more easily than you can in California. That appeals to a lot of the people that have moved here. Actually, they're very open-minded. They're socially tolerant. They're optimistic about the future. And that definitely helps what we're building as well. I think there are faculty from around the country that when they come and they visit the university and then they experience Austin more widely, they're like, this is a great just ecosystem here. And it embodies a lot of what we think of when we think about what's best about America. It's a place that welcomes all, people, no matter where they're from. It's a place that you can start and build things. It's a place where the American dream can be real. And so we're building something at the university in that larger context, which is, I think, really appealing for people. So there is something about Texas which is very special. And I think some of these efforts that are taking off on these university campuses are happening in places that are actually kind of high growth places that are appealing to a lot of people. I mean, the University of Florida's center is very big and growing, and Florida's that kind of a state as well. I mean, it's scooped up a lot of people from other parts of the country and continues to grow. North Carolina, the UNC is doing this, and that's of course set against the backdrop of a very dynamic kind of regional economy that's there. And so I think those, people like to look at what we're building just purely through the politics lens, but I think there's something about the socioeconomic environment of the places where this is happening, which is really important too. Because you're an academic, I'm an academic. When you choose where to actually work, there's a whole bunch of considerations. It's not just the small department that you're working in. You're in a larger university context and within a larger, in many cases, metropolitan context, which helps your work.
And also in Austin, because it's related, there is the new upstart University of Austin, which shares a lot of the values, or at least the concern with what the School of Civic Leadership and the Civitas Institute at the University of Texas, Austin, does.
That's right.
I had a conversation with Neil Ferguson about that. The question, I said, well, shouldn't we just reform the universities, right? Like, why start up anew? And his response is that, well, we've had new universities before, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have new universities again. And I find that a good argument. But at the same time, I said to him, well, but shouldn't we also reform the universities as we have them? The University of Texas is very large. I mean, how do you feel in relation to, is the University of Austin a competitor to you at the University of Texas? And how does that work? Or, that's a very different kind of, it's not very different, but there's similarities. I'm curious what you think of this upstart as well that's on your doorstep.
No, I'm a fan of what they're doing there. We're all friends. We go to each other's events. We've co-sponsored things together with the University of Austin, or UATX as people call it for short. And they just welcomed their first class of first-year students last month. So they're off to the races. They've, in a few years, they've stood this place up, gotten the accreditations, done all the things you have to go through to be a legitimate degree-granting institution they've been doing. And they have a building right downtown Austin, straight south of the university campus, about a mile, mile and a half. And all their students reside in West Campus UT. The largest concentration of students at the University of Texas is just to the west of the campus. It's like a whole district where there's lots of apartments and where a lot of the Greeks are as well. And the UATX students actually live over there as well. So they're actually kind of enmeshed within this broader university ecosystem as well. And I'm hopeful that they'll come to a lot of our events and stuff. So I think this is a both and effort. I think this is what they're doing is motivated by a lot of the same reasons that gave rise to what we're building, what we've been discussing. And it's an effort to kind of show and demonstrate and prove that you can create an elite private university again in America. And it's hard work. I mean, I think, I really admire what they've been doing because it's really challenging to build up a private institution from the ground up and recruit faculty and get students and all of that. And they've done a great job of marketing their programs. So we're not competitors. I'm sure in some ways when it comes to faculty recruitment, we are just in the nature of things. We'll probably be interviewing some of the same people for teaching jobs and things like that. And we'll see how the student applications go and whether, some students will want to go there, some will come to us. But I think we'll end up doing a lot in partnership together just because we geographically proximate. We have overlapping networks, and there's some people who are professors at UT will probably co-teach or teach modules and courses down there as well, and so it's a good partnership. So Justin Dyer, who's the dean of the School of Civic Leadership, and I were kind of joined at the hip building this effort together. We're good friends with Pano, who's the president of UATX, and their whole senior leadership team, and coordinate with them quite a bit. This whole effort even more interesting that, I was describing kind of this Austin ecosystem. It's really having two universities kind of at the core of that with just a really dynamic kind of tech-centric economy that's really been exploding here for the last 2 decades makes for a really interesting intellectual ecosystem here that is kind of unmatched in other U.S. cities as far as I'm concerned. It's really quite special. So I'm a big fan of what they're doing and I want them to be successful.
If anything, it kind of goes to the core of, a bit of competition is good. Because it keeps you guys, you have to say, well, what is University of Austin doing? And you kind of have to think, and that's good, right? That sense of, you're testing each other, and and that's not to say that competition is we're against them, right? I mean, competition can be very collaborative, right? I mean, it's not sort of trying to see who comes first. It's that you're sort of motivating each other, and that's what's good about, I think, ecosystems that are innovation centered, right? I mean, Silicon Valley is innovative because there's so much competition. And I guess that Silicon Valley model is now in Austin where you start businesses and, you go from one startup to another and there's all this spillover effects that happen. And that's a good thing, right? Rather than these kind of monoliths where, there's.
Yeah, for real. And the reason that we've chosen economic dynamism to be one of our core areas of inquiry and research and publication at the Civitas Institute is sort of because of this dynamic that you're talking about, that in many parts of our country and many parts of the UK and Europe, where you see stagnation happening, where you have entire regions or cities where there's just not been growth. They're living almost in perpetual recession. We do our GDP numbers in the aggregate often, and we talk about the United States as a whole, but there are parts of this country that have been like in recession for a long, long time. Yeah. And then there are places like Austin, which are complete boom towns. If any of the listeners have been to Austin, but it's been 5 years since you've been here, you should come back and see it. Like you wouldn't even recognize it. The downtown. There's, I think my wife and I are paddleboarders. We were on the lake last weekend, and I think we counted 9 cranes on buildings that are all set to be over 50 stories tall, currently under construction. I mean, it's just it's an exploding place, and I've been fortunate enough to live in a number of dynamic places where construction cranes are practically my indicator of whether I'm living in a dynamic place. They symbolize a lot, and when you are in a place where you have lots of people starting, building, and making things, you actually see all these spillover effects, like you mentioned, and you also see the effect on working class wages. You see people that have maybe hourly wage jobs. They do the same thing everybody else does. They can job hop. New companies are starting that create opportunity for them, and yet so much of our politics these days are driving kind of economic discussions in the other direction. It doesn't matter which political party you're in the United States right now. There's kind of a move towards kind of more industrial policy, top-down management of the economy from the nation's capital, and in many ways using the administrative state towards certain very specific ends, whether it's in our trade policy or what have you. And each of those policies has maybe some merits on its own, but when you roll them together, it's sort of like the dynamism caucus doesn't exist anymore. And there's a lot of empirical research that suggests that we could be much more dynamic, both here in the United States and certainly in the UK. I mean, the UK is I think, going through a kind of a phase of stagnation right now, which is really alarming, and new and better ideas for policymakers, like where growth really comes from, and especially growth that's truly inclusive, that raises the wages of people all across the board. Like, what kinds of dynamic activity are we missing that we could actually help foster? So we're committed to that research program here at the Institute, but in part because we're in Austin. I mean, it's a great place to be, kind of the headquarters of academic research on dynamism, because it's such a dynamic place in and of itself. And there's a lot of people in our kind of the commercial ecosystem here that are also interested in those ideas and willing to partner with us. In fact, I think our next symposium next spring, economic dynamism policy, will be in partnership with some of the companies in town here. There's people that want to be engaged in producing more and better ideas in that regard.
Well, I think you need to duplicate it here in Edinburgh, because the UK needs more productivity and more dynamism. I mean, it's a really big deal when you look at the productivity levels in the UK and in Europe. I mean, some parts of Europe do really well and are innovative and have good workforces, but the UK it's not in a good shape. And there's more talk of, having industrial policy and like you said, on merit, there's certain things that the state can do that should be done, and that's fine. But I think there also is that risk of assuming that, if we just have a consistent industrial policy, it's going to lead to sort of, and at the time, I don't think that actually I wouldn't put my money on it, because I feel like it's assuming that the state knows what they're doing and they're picking the winners, if you like. And often it's, how do you create that sense of the dynamism? And here in Scotland, I mean, I think, taxes are higher here than they are in England. And, you kind of look and you say, well, where's the outcomes of paying more taxes than you do in England? You don't actually see it. Where are the new industries? And this is a place that, Scotland, for as small as it is, has 5, world-class universities. I mean, it used to be a center of intellectual and kind of commercial innovation. It still has that potential, but there's just something kind of lacking, and there's that sort of stagnation that's set in, and it's quite depressing, because you see so much potential. And again, I think, it's not to say, we just need to kind of like slash and burn and cut the state to nothing and sort of, uber Thatcherite policy. I know someone would probably say, we tried that and it didn't work, but I think it's like, how do you grasp that dynamism and to encourage entrepreneurship, encourage big companies to come to town and hire people, right? So it's not just about mom and pop stores. It's like, how do you get Amazon to come in? How do you get these other companies to come in? Yeah. And I'm not sure if they figure that out.
No, it really is. It is a shame, really, when you think about where you're sitting, and we are all beneficiaries of what happened in the 18th century, like right where you're sitting.
Yes, literally in this house.
Right up the road there in Edinburgh. And it's have an ongoing concern with the future of the UK, just for personal reasons. I used to live in London. I love it there. Both of my kids are graduates of the University of St. Andrews. One of them lives in Edinburgh, down the road from where you're sitting. We spend a lot of time in the UK and have a lot of friends there, and have ongoing, even, work partnerships there. And I've been following this, and I think that neither political party really has figured out kind of what the big levers are. People are talking about these issues from a diagnosis standpoint, but when it comes to solutions, that it's almost like the ideas are just too bold for anyone to feel comfortable talking about right now. But there's some good work out there. I mean, I think there was an essay a couple of years ago, I think, on Works in Progress website called "The Housing Theory of Everything" that Sam Bowman wrote, and I know he and Ben Southwood and some other kind of up-and-coming writers in the UK have been chronicling things like just how long it takes to get things permitted, how long it takes to build tunnels, how long it takes, and why you can't build new housing. And that's kind of why that issue's at the center of it. It's like, if you could fix that issue, if you could actually create a supply that kept up with the actual demand of a younger workforce, then it would have these knock-on effects in all these other aspects of the economy. And it's that for whatever reason, over the last 30, 40 years, the UK's just gotten really good at allowing people to stop things. And if something's happening in your backyard or down the street from you, you understand why you might want to stop it. It's kind of a very natural human thing to want to do. But when you kind of roll that up into kind of a collective action problem. You've got this really big issue in the UK, which is it's a lack of dynamism issue is what it is. I mean, I really do think that understanding what a dynamic society is and then walking back from that saying what kinds of things are we doing that are prohibiting us from getting there, and having some real kind of debates in the public square about that is going to be really necessary before you get the political will to actually make the kind of changes that you need. Because somebody will be really unhappy or inconvenienced by some of the solutions that are put forward, and you have to be prepared for that and start kind of sowing the seed. We have this advantage in America that we have 50 states, we have lots of different centers of activity, and people can vote with their feet, and they do. San Francisco's had to figure out in the last couple of years what to change because people have just been leaving. During the pandemic, people just took off, and Texas benefited from that, Florida benefited from that, Idaho benefited from that. It's the people move around, whereas in the UK you just don't have that dynamic, and so the solutions in some ways are going to be even more difficult to put in place, but they need to be done.
So I just want to ask one question though that came to mind about what you're doing at Civitas and the School of Civic Leadership. How do you ensure that you're not also recreating a different kind of monoculture or mono kind of ideological, if you ensure that there's that dynamism, what are you doing to recruit or to be open to the student that's going to shout down the professor? Not saying that those are good, but how do you do that? So it's not just one community that's separate from another, because again, that's what we need is where we're able to talk to each other and we're able to have those kind of reasoned debates.
Right. I think it starts with the multidisciplinary nature of the curriculum and the way that is reflected in the faculty. So and this is actually part of the appeal for faculty or prospective faculty, people who have applied for open professor jobs at the school. They come from political science, they come from philosophy, they come from history, they come from economics. I've actually been surprised at the success we've had recruiting economists. I kind of just assumed that economists would all want to teach in an economics department, but there's a certain kind of class of economists that likes this multidisciplinary environment. And so I think that's really where the answer to your question starts, is in the faculty itself, coming from these different disciplines. Like I said earlier in our conversation, they'll basic set of value propositions about American liberal democracy that they generally want to help students understand it before they just want to tear it down. To try to understand what went before us, why does our liberal democratic order actually work well compared to other places, and let's look at that. So there's definitely going to be that tendency, I think, in the kind of people that we recruit. But I think I'm already seeing this. I mean, there's enough just diversity of interest and discipline and presuppositions that there's going to be some really great debates. There's going to be some really healthy debates, just even among the people who are teaching there and how they structure the courses that they're teaching, that the students are then exposed to. And with the students, we'll just have to see. I mean, we're really we're going to welcome the first class of first years in a year. So the academic calendar starting a year from just a couple weeks ago. And so we're marketing it right now broadly to students across the state of Texas and even nationally. And we'll just kind of have to see from the students that apply and declare this. The way it works at UT is you apply to the University of Texas, and then you declare what major of study you want to study. And you can always change that after you get here. But we'll have a sense once we get an applicant pool of the kinds of students that want to be a part of this program. And it'll probably be a mix of students that come from all kinds of, some from charter schools, some from private, classical schools, some from They'll take kind of a gamble on a new school with a civics honors degree that is a new thing. Will probably in the early couple of years attract students that have some interest in those issues already. That's why they're applying there instead of to the business school or to the history program or whatever. And then as we grow the school, I think just on its merits, just as a kind of I think of it as like an elite honors college on a public university campus, it'll start appealing to students for broader reasons. So it's a little. I'm not trying to avoid answering your question super clearly. It's just it's kind of a work in progress. We don't actually know what the incoming class is going to look like. The one thing that we have to kind of gauge on are the students in our undergraduate program at Civitas now, which I described earlier in the conversation. They're from all across the campus. I mean, we've got students that are in the economics department, philosophy students in different programs. And because it's competitive, it's a really bright group of students. We have a lot of dual majors. I had dinner the other night with one student who's a triple major. They were really engaged, and I think kind of representative of the students that will probably apply to the school. I don't even know how I would describe all of their politics. I'm sure some of them are registered Democrats, some are registered Republicans, some of them are probably don't know what they are, but they have in common just a real interest and inquiry about the American experience, what our institutions are, what they consist of, where they came from, what it would mean to be a leader in them, whether that's politics, the media, the economy, what have you. And I would say what they have in common is just a sense of good faith inquiry. They're not there to be like radicals in training, or they didn't sign up because they see this as an activist organization. They see this as a place to really help them expand their grasp as students of the wider world around them. And that seems to be sort of typical of the student that signs up in the first place.
The intellectually curious.
Yeah, they are.
Which is,
they really are. I really enjoy my conversations with them. It's a great group of students.
No, I think that for me, the best students are always the ones that are just there to learn, that are curious and that are open and, want to engage with the texts and the ideas that are put in front of them and do it in a respectful, productive manner.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's what university is all about. And and I think it's also important for the classroom, right? Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of students can be discouraged from participating just on the account of one or two students that dominate and push conversations and make them feel afraid to debate. And I think, getting back to that where it's okay to discuss ideas is important. Yeah,
for sure. And maybe part of what we're building here as this expands on other university campuses helps in sort of an indirect way with what you mentioned earlier, in just maybe the lack of civic education and the primary and secondary school experience that students have. I mean, if these options are out there, at least in different places around the country, as more students apply to them, it might help in certain, as we say, K-12 environments here, where people are like, oh, there's these things popping up on university campuses. Our students, should be prepared for that if that's what they want to do, at least for that one teacher of U.S. history or whatever. It might make them think a little bit differently about how they structure their class. Because I do think, this is hard to study, and especially in a country as large and diverse as the United States, it's hard to describe what kind of trend that we've seen. But I think anecdotally, the impression that a lot of people in higher education have who care about civic education, who care about a proper understanding of our institutions, feel like there's been an erosion there as well. And there's probably a lot of factors at play there. I mean, I when I was 15 years old, I was on one of those people-to-people exchange trips to Europe, and this was before the fall of the Berlin Wall. And one of our stops in the 6 European countries we went to was in Czechoslovakia then. I mean, when it was still a communist country. And I was 15, and I was in a public high school in Indiana. And somehow my fellow classmates and I knew enough to argue with our tour guides, who were university students, who were certified by the party there, to tell us why the Czechoslovakia was the most wonderful country in the world and why communism was so great. And we were arguing with them. And I remember having this argument about the Constitution and talking about the Declaration and what it actually meant to have unalienable rights and how sovereignty was located in the individual. Somehow I knew how to say those things.
At age 15.
I don't even remember learning that. Like, I don't remember the course that I took at school, but somehow it was in our education enough that we were, and we were 15, so we were, we were feeling competitive and argumentative and, feeling tribal and kind of defending our home turf because it was being criticized, probably more than, having arrived at these things through reasoned deliberation. But, our arguments started there. And it's so funny. I just kind of assumed that's kind of how students were educated. And that's definitely not the case now. I think, you definitely see students on university campuses who really cannot articulate kind of just the core elements of the U.S. Constitution, like where the separation of powers comes from, how it's structured. I think a lot of professors in American universities feel like they're doing remedial work on that front, and it could be that kind of the long arc of some of the problems that we were describing earlier on university campuses didn't just start in the last 5-6 years. I think for people in our political world who've been criticizing wokeness and these things, the impression I get is a lot of people think this just somehow started like 5 or 6 years ago. As someone who was in graduate school in the 1990s, I mean, I can say critical race theory was a thing back then too. The the sessions I had to take because I had a teaching fellowship in my PhD program on speech codes and what you could and couldn't say was, we had like a 3-day seminar on these things. It was very similar to what has been going on recently. And so I think some of those things have just become embedded institutionally more now than they were back then. I mean, the people I was in graduate school with are now running things.
But there was,
so some of those things have just kind of eroded as kind of a natural arc. I think to some of that. That's my hypothesis anyway.
But I think, but the debates were different in the sense. I mean, I remember when I was in university and graduate school in the noughties, the early 2000s, is that multiculturalism was a debate, right?
Right.
It was. I remember we debating it, and I don't. Remember it being conflictual as it is now, and so
I agree with
doctrinaire. That. It was this, like you said. I mean, political correctness was a thing, right? It was,
right.
We discussed these things. So it's, issues of racism, and that's why I was always, watching, from afar, the American experience in the last so many years around slavery, and then some people saying, "Oh, they never taught slavery in schools," and I thought, well, my public school education in Colorado was. How did you not study it, right? It was part of American history.
Definitely part of my education.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I remember civics. I mean, your story about, being able to defend the Constitution at 15. I mean, I remember learning some of this stuff in primary school already, right? In elementary school, you start learning about how American government works. And I mean, it's pretty basic at some point. And then, as you go through junior high and high school, it gets better. But I remember these things were being kind of part of the educational experience. And I mean, just as an anecdote, I learned here, someone was telling me a few weeks ago, oh yeah, here in Scotland, students do not learn about the Scottish Enlightenment as a matter of like core curriculum. You have to take you have to make a choice at some point, and you do this modern history, and then you get Scottish Enlightenment. And I just thought, wow, something that has been so fundamental to Scotland, even Scottish identity, and this is the irony of it, is if you think, the Scottish National Party has been in power and, it's all about independence, you would think if the nationalists are in charge, they'd want to say, look at the Scottish Enlightenment. This was our contribution to the shaping of the modern world. That's not taught in schools.
Right.
I mean, but then you kind of question, well, what is being taught? But
yeah, it's really a shame just because you can have very different interpretations of the goodness or badness of these moments in history. You can be a critic of the American founding, the hypocrisy within the American founding that, like
absolutely.
You can talk about all those things all you want, but there's something just fundamental about understanding the institutions that are so powerful in our public life today. And so, as someone who spent 13 years of my professional life in Washington, D.C., I've been right in the middle of the sausage making enterprise and have worked in the White House and have been in lots of meetings on Capitol Hill with Hill staffers. And, for people that want to move to the nation's capital and be involved in the political life and deliberations of the United States, you're arriving at institutions that have procedures, policies, and presence that stems from this long arc of history and evolution. And you're going to be better at your job if you understand those things, right? Yeah. So that's really what we're trying to do with these efforts. I think what we're doing here at UT Austin and some of these other universities that we've been talking about is really trying to equip people to be able to function at a high level in those places. Yeah. And so if you're going to be a civic leader but you hope to work in the corporate world or something like that, it's still really, really valuable for you to understand the political economy of the country and how it works. And we'll have faculty with maybe different interpretations of regulatory bodies and whether this one does a good job or whether the administrative state is suffocating parts of the economy over here. People will have different views of these things, but it's really important to understand how the federal agencies interact with the economy for better or worse, because if you're going to be working at a high level in any of these places, you need to understand those things. And so I think that's kind of the core, right? And so trying to indoctrinate students on either side of the ideological spectrum about how to think in a very narrow way, like what's the truly just way for the United States government to be structured, or what's what would it mean for capitalism to actually be good rather than bad or something. Like, just you have to understand the nature of these things, and that's what this phase in life should be about, is learning as much as you can, so that you build on that and actually function, like I said, at a high level, no matter which of these institutions you choose to be in.
It's about functioning in the real world.
Yeah, for real.
On that note, Ryan Streeter from the University of Texas at Austin's Civitas Institute, thanks for being on the New Enlightenment podcast, and I hope to see you here in person at Panmure House again soon. You have been listening to the New Enlightenment podcast from Adam Smith's Panmure House. If you found this interesting, please consider subscribing and sharing. If you would like to learn more about Panmure House, please go to our website, panmurehouse.org. Thanks for listening, and until next time.